I call to order the meeting of the Minnehaha Creek Watershed District Board of Managers on November 9th, 2023. All managers are present. Members of the public, nobody, okay. Then let's move to item 3, which is approval of the agenda. Is there a motion?
Move approval.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second? Manager Maxwell? Those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? On the consent agenda, we're going to pull the minutes. So the items we need to consider are the two resolutions. 23067 is approval of the board committee and board meeting calendar for the coming year. And 23068 is authorization to release a request for quotes for the water quality lab analysis. Is there a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Manager Hedgemati moves. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Sando seconds. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? I can report that I've attended 2 meetings with Mr. Whisker. We met with Commissioner Anderson and Commissioner Lundy earlier this week. They were both very cordial, positive meetings. I think that Commissioner Anderson is going to give a tour of the 6 Mile Marsh restoration in the spring. And Commissioner Lundy, of course, is always interested in 325 Lake Road because he has the blue line in his district. Overall, we were able to talk about our programs and climate action and say how important it is that we exchange information with the county. So I would say they were very good meetings. More coming. Manager Loftus, would you report on the Operations and Programs Committee meeting, please?
Yes, we met this evening earlier tonight. Got introductions to 2 new staff members, which we're grateful to have them on board. We welcomed them, and then discussed our annual Citizens Advisory Committee appointments. And I believe the staff's recommendations will be presented for approval at an upcoming meeting. And generally speaking, the board was in complete consensus with staff recommendations, and thank you to all our applicants, and I think it was a well-run process.
Thank you. Thank you. The Minnesota Watershed's annual meeting is coming up at the end of the month. We have 3 managers registered to go at this point, Manager Olson, Manager Sando, and I. We need to name 2 delegates and an alternate that we need to send in to Minnesota Watersheds, the people who will be eligible to vote at the business meeting. Any discussion or questions? Who would like to be the delegates? Be a delegate? You want to be a delegate?
Yes.
Okay. Then I appoint Manager Olson and Manager Sando as delegates and myself as an alternate, and would like a motion to confirm that.
Move approval.
Thank you, Manager Miller. Is there a second?
Second.
Manager Loftus seconds. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? All right. The upcoming meeting for board and committees in the agenda. We have a Monday meeting in the last week of November to account for the annual meeting at the Minnesota Watersheds, and Manager Hedgemati is the liaison for the November 15th CAC meeting. Let's go to item 11.1, Resolution 23069, approval of DEI framework and work plan, and Ms. Moran is presenting.
So in terms of the outline for tonight, first I will be just regrounding the board around the purpose and direction, setting to date around our DEI, Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Initiative.
Kate?
Oh, yes. Oh, he's in that.
Oh, there we go. Great, perfect. Thank you for that. So next then I'll be outlining the discovery process, which was initiated in November of 2022 with a staff-led work group leading the discovery work and development of the recommendations outlined in our DEI framework. And the board reviewed the DEI framework at our July 27th PPC meeting and provided input on the development of near-term actions. And the staff worked with Manager Hejamati for additional input and vetted the near-term work plan and refined DEI framework with our Citizens Advisory Committee in September, and then the Board of Managers during our October 12th OPC meeting. And so based off of board and CAC input, staff are before the board this evening with Resolution 23-069 to approve the DEI framework and 2024 work plan. And just to kind of reground us, the district's mission-driven work really is, building from this belief that the natural systems underpin place and community. And this vision of a balanced urban ecology is really built from the understanding that where we have our built natural systems working together, we can create that triple bottom line. So that environmental, the economic, and social value to the communities that we serve. And at the core of our work, we really shape the landscape through the construction of capital projects that improve water quality, reduce flooding, and we really intentionally consider all components of that natural and human environment. And we know that successful, sustainable, livable communities are really built on that foundation of integrated planning. And so this is why we see DEI just as a layer in our integrated planning approach to achieve our mission-driven work. And as we discussed back in July and October committee meetings, we also recognize that there are barriers to achieving this vision of a balanced urban ecology. And we recognize that disparities do exist in areas including health, income, mobility, and choice. And it's really important for the district to understand how its projects and policies could amplify or reduce those disparities across our watershed. And just as we integrate land use and water factors into its planning decision-making to really deliver on this vision and to bring value to all in our watershed, we just have to understand the composition of its communities and meaningfully include a diverse set of perspectives to really inform our work. So really getting at that, who and how we engage. And this is why we continue to improve, as we continue to improve the landscape through our projects and our policies, we really need to understand the diversity of its member communities and their respective issues and needs. We also have to identify the disparities and acting to promote equity by delivering watershed solutions that benefit all and create opportunity for meaningful inclusion of our communities and individuals that the district works with. In addition to that external planning approach, the heart of the organization is the people. And so this is why the district recognizes we must also integrate DEI strategies into its workforce, its board, its CAC, to really ensure that equitable practices, bringing in diverse perspectives, and bringing a sense of inclusion and belonging that will ultimately improve the organization and how it does its work. And so for all these reasons, the Board of Managers had established DEI planning and policy development as an organizational priority, including budget funds, and directed staff to initiate that internal discovery work. And as an initial step to really formally integrate the concepts of diversity, equity, inclusion into our watershed approach, the staff-led work group collaboratively completed that discovery process to begin building organizational capacity around those topics. And this work group really researched and synthesized its findings and recommendations into the DEI findings and framework, or DEI framework, which is attachment 1 in your board packet this evening. And this informed the development of the near-term actions, or that 2024 work plan, which is attachment 2 in your packet, through discussions with staff, board, and the CAC. And this discovery research completed by the work group really focused on 3 areas. The first piece was the development of a centralized hub of relevant DEI resources to support staff, board, CAC engagement and learning and self-reflection on DEI topics. Secondly was an environmental scan of comparable agencies and policies to guide further engagement across the organization and really help us highlight potential areas of improvement for consideration. And the work group had 47 plans that were identified and selected for review based on kind of level of relevance to the district and its work. Geography, we looked within the watershed, within the Midwest region and nationally, and also considered level of quality of those products. And based off of that, we created a standard matrix to really capture the content and that information that really informed the development of our DEI framework and the areas of focus and potential actions. And lastly, we reviewed potential DEI consultants and available skills and assessments of services needed to help shape the DEI work. And we really recognize we are not DEI experts. And so while we went through this discovery process, we were really trying to understand how best to bring in outside expertise to help us identify blind spots, gaps, as we move this initiative forward. And so the work group looked at 39 consultants that were identified and selected for review. And for there, they looked at, again, the geographic location, we looked at the work portfolio, and case studies or any organizations that received, recognition for their work. This group also collected services, project examples, and client lists as well. And this is really, again, to help us focus on areas of work and potential skills that we might want to lean on. And then also did a procurement scan for content, looking at available RFPs, consultant proposals, and existing consultant lists as well for additional background. And so attachment 1 in your packet is the findings and framework, so our DEI framework. And so this document includes the content of the approach of the discovery process, which I just walked through, an overview of the work group's findings, and then recommendations for the DEI framework and next steps. Overall, it's really intended to share the work completed during this discovery phase, inform our near-term actions, and then really guide development and integration into our next 10 years, so our 2027 Watershed Management Plan. And the Board of Managers have reviewed and provided input on the DEI framework and the near-term actions, as I mentioned at our July and October committee meetings. And so I'll just briefly walk through the framework and work plan. You're welcome to follow along in your packet if you wish. And so based on the findings from the staff work group, the DEI framework has been organized into 3 areas of areas that are relevant to the district. So our operations, our projects and policies, and then outreach and engagement. So looking at operations, so more that internally focused, the people and process, that's looking to create a culture of inclusion and belonging, provide training and policies that support equitable recruitment, hiring, retention, and those procurement practices. Kind of shifting to more externally focused mission-driven work, our projects and policies. That's really looking for using data to understand the community composition, the potential impacts of the district's work, and to really advance our project and policy solutions while we're striving for our mission and addressing those disparities and promoting equity in our work. And then for outreach and engagement, that's really looking to promote organizational transparency, creating those inclusive opportunities to engage in planning and decision making. And we reviewed the DEI framework, with the board and the CAC, and there was a couple takeaways from those conversations. Overall, there was support for the district taking this custom-tailored approach to developing the DEI framework and its work. In addition, there was a preference for the staff to lead near-term actions and really utilize a consultant expertise for kind of key areas or discrete scopes of work to ensure we're avoiding any blind spots. And so as we looked to develop a more focused near-term work plan, we really put an emphasis on that staff-led near-term actions with discrete work from a consultant. In addition, we wanted the work plan to support the district, being able to take action now, because as we zoom out in terms of the overall DEI planning context, while we work towards our 2027 plan and integrating DEI into that planning process and that ultimate next 10-year guidance, we wanted to make sure we could be taking action today. And so with those parameters, we narrowed in on the following highlighted sections of our DEI framework. And we discussed these near-term actions in September with the CAC and then at that October 12th OPC meeting. And so I'll just, again, be briefly walking through these recommended areas of focus. So for operations, looking under equitable staff recruitment, retention, and promotion practices, we are recommending utilizing an external consultant for a discrete scope of work to review and update human resources policies and practices. So really looking for potential bias in our employment practices and making sure that we're reflecting the best practices to identify, attract, invest in, and retain a diverse workforce. For education and training, we see this being staff-led to promote the training education of the staff, the board, and the CAC on general DEI work. And one of the takeaways from the discovery process was building a common understanding that we all have bias. It's just part of being human. And so to address this, the district, developed its DEI resource hub, which provides tools for, staff, CAC, board members to really better understand where their areas of improvements could be and to help them manage the inherent bias that we all have. And so that's Appendix C in the DEI framework. And as I mentioned earlier, under the staff-led work group, they, created this hub for that capacity building. They also, in this hub, created, content for general knowledge around the DI-related terms, thinking about everything from interpersonal and group work to, current beliefs, making sure the kind of that reflective developmental self-work, and then organizational systems work. And we really intend this to be a living document for all to use, and we can continue to add resources as we learn and grow. And then for through the board input and feedback, another area we saw value in staff taking a lead for near-term actions is to improve the district's culture of inclusion, belonging, and engagement. And as we've talked about, as we talk about with these terms, I find it really useful to think about, having a seat at the table as inclusion, and then feeling like your voice is being heard in belonging. And so with this, the staff in the near term would evaluate and update employee onboarding processes to enhance belonging. And so that would include the development of a socialization model for onboarding, and that would include defining roles, expectations, responsibilities. And this is something we discussed at that October 12th OPC meeting, which we explored with Manager Hejamati, on how we could really develop and utilize the socialization model to increase inclusion and belonging in our organization. In addition, for a near-term work for the staff, would be looking to evaluate the need for an onboarding mentorship or buddy program as well to, again, work towards that culture. So in summary, for operations, we see work supported by a DEI consultant to help us update human resources, policies, and practices. Internally, we see staff leading, promoting training and education, and developing an onboarding process to support inclusion and belonging. So moving over to projects and policies for near-term actions. So with DEI policy and goals, again, we recognize we are not DEI experts. While we conducted a robust discovery process, we really see value in leveraging outside expertise for a discrete scope of work to review our DEI framework to identify any potential blind spots or gaps that we've missed. And then for the equity lens for the district, we see, again, staff leading this effort with the development and integration of an equity lens. So that would include using demographic data, bringing in new data sets to really help us understand that community composition and diversity. And then we can integrate that information into our planning and decision making, including capital projects and policy planning, such as our upcoming climate action work. And so in July and October, as we explored, what we could consider when developing an equity lens, two big takeaways that came out of those discussions was, one, there's support for, building an equity lens for our projects, our policies, and our engagement efforts. And two, there's value in that data-driven approach and making sure we're utilizing the right metrics to track progress as well. And so overall, the district has already started using DEI in its planning process, as parts of its data-driven approach. However, again, we really see the need to build a more consistent, thoughtful approach that can be applied for all of this external-facing work. And one of the examples, just as a reminder, that we explored back at the July PPC meeting was, as we're looking to build out an equity lens, from this data-driven approach, it's really critical that, we're taking a look at it more holistically. So unlike a traditional project, which you can see a couple projects here on your screen as an example, traditionally you would buffer around that individual project, pull in your data layers. But again, we're trying to make sure we can step back and understand that, water does flow downstream. So making sure we can see that entire impact shed from where the projects are located all the way to the users at the water body downstream. And so with that, I think the Minneapolis Parkway is just a useful example of, the importance and power of having the right type of data, not only to inform a project, but then also track progress over time. So in summary, for projects and policies, we see work supported by a DEI consultant to review our DEI framework for any gaps. And then we see staff leading the development of an equity lens for the district. And then shifting to outreach and engagement, we see for this, we see staff leading the development of an engagement framework. And so that would include creating, tailored engagement strategies based off of community composition data. Again, making sure we're data-driven, integrating those best practices for engaging historically underrepresented communities across our watershed, and then developing a standardized engagement and facilitation toolkit, both for internal and external communication needs. And then also develop and implement a language access plan. So that's really getting at making sure we can have the appropriate process and template for translations and interpretation needs for any outreach and engagement efforts. And so, again, just to kind of give you all a flavor, back in July, we also, explored and reflected on how our integrated planning work in the Minnehaha Greenway, really ties into DEI. And so we talked about in July PPC about the district really focusing its work there because it was the most degraded portion of Minnehaha Creek. It had the highest impervious cover and pollutant loading per area. And so one of the projects we had talked about in committee was the Cottageville Park. And so back in 2015, the district partnered with the city of Hopkins to really expand and improve on Cottageville Park. And so that included new park amenities as well as an underground regional stormwater treatment system. And prior to that project, Cottageville Park really occupied a small, mostly hidden portion of the park site, of the current park site, and experienced, criminal activity. And so the city and the community concern was addressed through the project design by expanding and improving the visibility of the park. And, the district really worked with the city to put significant effort into the engagement efforts of the local community to seek input on planning and design. And, the district worked with the U of M to do a community capacity study. That included using multiple languages, going to the local community, working with community ties. And so this engagement really helped shape the elements of the project. And the example we highlighted in PPC was the garden space you can see here on your screen. That was originally programmed to be a sports field, but we heard from the community through the engagement efforts their need was a garden, which is still they're heavily used today and very successful. And overall, we see from this project, produce significant benefits both the creek and the community. And while we did many things right around DEI in our planning, engagement, and design, we also had a lot of learning opportunities from this work. And so again, as we're moving forward, we just want to make sure we have a thoughtful and really comprehensive approach to integrating DEI into all of our planning and our engagement efforts. And so in summary, we have our, near-term action items here highlighted in yellow. So with our near-term actions, we would, develop a scope of work with a consultant to update our HR policies and review our framework for blind spots. And then internally, we'd be collaborating, developing internal processes and deliverables for training, education, onboarding process, equity lens, and engagement framework. And so with that, I will wrap up here with staff recommendation for resolution 23-069 for the approval of the DI framework and the 2024 work plan. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution?
So moved.
Manager Olson, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Hijmati? Any questions or discussion?
Thank you to the staff work group and Manager Hajmati.
I'm sorry?
I said thank you to the staff work group and to you as well
Thank you.
for a great product. I'm excited.
You're welcome.
I like the resource list you have. I'll do some reading. Check in there.
Okay.
Anything else before we vote?
I
Those
got-
are-
I got
Manager
a
Olson?
quick
Yes.
question. This may be for Louis. When we attended the quarterly meeting of the Metro Watersheds meeting, Bowser did a presentation on how they're intending to add tribal governments to the areas that they cover. Currently, they don't, as I understand. And they let us know that under the understanding that if you have areas in your watershed that are Indian property, they would eventually be working with those tribal governments to create opportunities for everybody to get involved. Is that a brand new initiative on their part? Are you familiar with what Bowser was?
Madam President, Manager Olson, I am only vaguely familiar.
Okay.
It relates to another thought that I've had. We're currently working with the Minnesota Waters to revise the Watershed Act
Okay.
and update it, primarily in housekeeping matters. But one thing that occurred to me was, and it would be less perhaps relevant in Minnehaha Creek setting, but for the Citizen Advisory Committee, there's a list of interested parties that should be represented.
Okay.
And it occurred to me that there should be tribal representatives where there's a tribal organization that's engaged. I think what the Bowser reference you're referring to is more site-based work, and so there may be an opportunity in this district to explore that.
Okay. Thank you.
Any other discussion? Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Thank you very much, Ms. Moran. Item 11.2 is Resolution 23070, Mr. Beck presenting.
President White, Board of Managers, thank you. I'm here today to present and request authorization to execute MOU with the Pollution Control Agency and DNR to evaluate the effectiveness of CARP management statewide. So I just wanted to give a little bit of framing for this and give some background and purpose before we get into the meat of the presentation. So in June 2023, MCWD staff had closed out Lessard Sam's Outdoor Heritage Council grant for the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay Carp Management Program and had presented the preliminary lake results and how things had improved or changed in each lake. We've also forecasted beyond the initial preliminary results that we had developed. We were going to either contract with a consultant or with a researcher, and we had budgeted $75,000 for that in 2023 to review our work and identify areas that could be improved or make recommendations on further analysis. However, since then, we've been networking and asking questions about what we've seen relative to what other organizations in the state has seen for carp management with the Pollution Control Agency and the DNR, and have developed a partnership or are working on that to expand the effectiveness of assessment of carp management to the entire state instead of just the district. And so that's really to provide a little bit of framing for today's presentation. And with that, I can provide what we'll be talking about today. And so first, I think we'll just talk about the history of MCWD's involvement with carp management and how we've got here from the studies that we've done. A brief overview of just how carp impact lakes, the lake ecology. Preliminary results, and so just a review of what we've been seeing. And lastly, or second to last, rationale for the partnership with MCWD, DNR, and MPCA, and why that is, we see a stronger value versus us doing it alone. And lastly, request for authorization to execute an MOU between the three organizations. So I think there's always value of understanding where we are and looking back where we've been. And so in 2013, we did a diagnostic assessment of the 6 Mile Creek Halsted Bay subwatershed. And there were several impaired lakes, and there was multiple drivers of those impairments. And the main ones were altered wetlands, stormwater runoff, internal sediment loading or sediment phosphorus release, and one of the other ones was common carp. There were common carp in many of the lakes. and that could be having an impact on the lake ecology. Lake ecology. In addition, in 2014, Minnehaha Creek Watershed District did a total maximum daily load. So without getting into what that is, it's a state documentation of phosphorus sources for impaired lakes and identifying how to reduce those phosphorus sources to meet water quality standards for any given lake that's impaired. And what the tables look like for those documents is a list of each impaired lake, so in our upper watershed, each impaired lake, and what the source of phosphorus is. And what I want you to draw your eyes to is there's this category called rough fish. And what you can see is they have a triangle instead of primary, secondary. It says potential source, unknown level of impact. And that's really important because many of the other sources, there's a quantifiable phosphorus load reduction to meet our water quality standards. Whereas carp or other rough fish, there's an unclear goal or unclear response for each lake. And so that's a really important thing moving forward because we don't know how each lake is going to respond. And why would we be targeting carp for something that seems mildly unrelated, which is phosphorus? And that's really due to carp's ecology. They generally stir up sediment when they're either in the spawning process or they are feeding in the bottom of lakes to find food. And so the sediment stirring up really does two separate things. Number one, it directly uproots plants. And that's a problem because it causes there to be fewer plants. And that's really habitat for other fish. So people like to call them biological engineers because they're out there changing their environment to suit their needs. In addition, stirring up sediment decreases water clarity. So they stir up sediment, decrease water clarity, and what that does is also creates fewer plants. And so you can see that these two things really are negatively impacting lakes. However, there's a convoluting factor, which is external phosphorus sources also can convolute this picture. So you can imagine it's relatively simple in that carp stir up sediments, but you can see it gets a little bit complicated to understand exactly how carp fit into this relatively complicated picture of nutrient cycling in lakes. However, a researcher has made things a little bit simpler and said, if there is carp beyond 100 kilograms per hectare in any given lake, that's likely that that lake is negatively influenced and has fewer plants. And so there's at least some goal for us to work from, which is really great because identifying where we need to go is important so we know when we're done. So we took that information in combination with the studies that we had done and did a more robust assessment of the number of carp in any lake in 6 Mile Creek, Halsted Bay area. Sub-watershed, and 10 of the 14 lakes within the sub-watershed had carp beyond that 100 kilogram per hectare threshold. So from that, we applied for a Lessard Outdoor Heritage Council grant to drive or to remove carp through a variety of methods to reach that 100 kilogram per hectare threshold. And that was through a variety of methods. So we put in barriers to block migration so that they couldn't recruit or spawn in different areas. Aeration, which promotes other native fish to ensure that they can predate on carp eggs. And lastly, we did removals. And all of these actions were permitted by the Minnesota Department of Natural Resources. And this entire process was a great learning experience for us, whether it was learning methods for removal, how to implement the barriers, but more importantly, during the process, we learned a lot about the DNR's permitting process. And in a few of the lakes, including Zumbra and Steiger, they rejected our permits to do removals for carp, or to remove carp, which we were surprised by because it was above the 100 kilogram per hectare threshold. And so they explained, as we talked with them, they said, well, the vegetation is really in good condition. The water quality is in good condition. So why would you need to remove carp if the ultimate goal is good water quality and good vegetation? And after a little bit of reflection, we said that's actually a really good point. And so we put our resources into other lakes that are in really poor condition and more likely to be impacted by carp. And so that was a really great experience that helped us move forward. And so now that we're, I guess about 9 years ahead of where we were, or I guess 7. Doing mental math in public is never a good idea. But now that we've moved from having many of the lakes to above that 100 kilogram per hectare threshold to having only about 3 lakes above that 100 kilogram per hectare threshold, we wanted to make sure that we weren't only tracking the number of carp we've removed, but what the response of the lakes is, because that's the ultimate goal of what we're doing. And so what we saw was, for example, in Wasserman Lake, the gray line is the carp the total number of carp in Wasserman Lake, and we reduced that to below 100 kilograms per hectare. The blue bars are vegetation, so what we saw was vegetation respond and increase to the majority of the area that we expected to grow. That was a great result. However, if you go to a lake just nearby, we reduced carp in East Auburn Lake to below 100 kilograms per hectare. However, there hasn't been a response from vegetation, so you kind of scratch your head and say, I wonder why that's the case. And so we did that for each lake, and it was some lakes have responded better than others. And so it really begs the question of, how do carp impact water clarity? Because we haven't seen a really strong response in any of our lakes. What are the factors that influence vegetation when you remove carp? And what's the importance of connectedness and just water clarity in relation to vegetation compared to how carp? And as we were asking these questions to ourselves, but also talking to the Pollution Control Agency and the DNR, what we started to realize was everybody had these questions. It wasn't just us. And there's been a lot of carp management over the past 10 years. And they, like us, are being asked to do more and more of the carp management, but we don't know exactly which lakes are going to respond most favorably or very little. And that's something that a lot of organizations want to figure out. And so kind of boiling it down to one simple question, which is, what factors make carp management successful? And I think each one of our organizations has a very different reason for asking the question. We want to try and use our resources most effectively and do carp management where it makes sense, not just everywhere that there's carp. The Pollution Control Agency wants to develop statewide documents to help local organizations identify where it might work. And the Department of Natural Resources really wants to know how to permit and these things so that they're not impacting the vegetation at the expense of just removing carp. And so through a lot of discussion, we identified a way to move forward in partnership. So we have a statewide study that everybody can use to direct their organization versus just us having something to identify how successful we were moving forward. So, really one thing that isn't going to change is we're going to do a study to assess the effectiveness of carp management and use the $75,000 that we had budgeted and manage the contract. The difference is the DNR and the PCA are providing not only the data of statewide where carp management has occurred, the PCA is providing the water quality data statewide and doing their own analysis on that. Each agency, I guess I said that, they're also going to review the consultants and then project scope and help guide to ensure that they're answering the questions that are important to them, but also will answer the critical questions that we've already outlined. And lastly, and I think most importantly, the DNR and PCA will review the draft reports and ultimately endorse the final reports based on their review, as long as the findings are within the scope that we originally agree on. And so that's a really important one because it adds a level of authority statewide that I don't think that we could have if we just did a single study on our own lakes. And so we're really excited about this because not only it's going to help us inform how we move forward with carp management and what lakes we do it in, because the requests likely will increase, they won't decrease. So finding a way to move forward with carp management in the most effective way is really great for us. But I think it's exciting to think that the state could also find value in helping guide statewide where CART management is implemented, I think is an exciting outcome of this. So with that, what staff's requesting is authorization to execute a memorandum of understanding with the DNR and the Pollution Control Agency to study CARP effectiveness statewide in Minnesota.
Thank you, Mr. Beck. Is there a motion to adopt the resolution? Manager Miller, is there a second?
Second.
Manager Maxwell, questions? Manager Hajmai?
What kind of time frame are we looking at for this study? Are we talking about a year, 2 years, 3 years? What are we looking at?
Yeah, President White, Manager Hejmati, the timeline for this scope is about a year. And the goal is to get an initial understanding of the factors that may influence CART management, or the effectiveness of CART management. And I think there may be the opportunity to do more studies statewide for other organizations and use this as a jumping off point, but I think we've identified a few basic questions that need to be answered, and I think through discussion, we think we could do that within a year.
Within a year?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, Manager Sando.
Do we contribute a budget for these studies, our organization?
Yeah, President White, Manager Sando, we have budgeted $75,000 this year, and which was going to originally be used only to study our own lakes, but we're going to be using that to do the analysis statewide, and to ensure that we're within budget and we're not doing some getting out in front of our skis with not enough budget. The contribution of data from the DNR and the PCA, I think, really will allow us to do that without going well over budget for a study that wouldn't be in scope.
Thank you.
Manager Olson?
Question is, how did those three groups, how did you and those other two get picked? We've got U of M doing invasive species research. We've got USGS involved. How did your team get formed?
Manager Olson, that's a great question. I mean, the most obvious interaction that we thought we'd turn in, we had that initial interaction with the DNR of them rejecting some of our permits, and we thought, well, wouldn't it be great if we could help them more transparently say where CART management is going to be successful and approve those permits and then forecast where that they might not be successful. So that felt like a way to bring them in, and they have so much data on where CART management has occurred. It seemed like a really clear partnership. The MPCA has those documents that says, this is where we should do CART management, but they know the flaws in that. So we reached out to the folks that wrote the TMDLs to see if they'd be interested in working together. So that we really wanted to do the organizations that are focused on management to bring in the researchers to answer those specific questions before we kind of opened it up to many, many organizations.
The other comment is just congratulations on doing a statewide program and being just one watershed representing our technical side of things. It's a nice compliment to be part of that team, so I appreciate that.
Manager Miller?
The only thing worse than my long-term memory is my short-term memory, but the, all these projects that we've done out there, I mean, it's been 10 years, where are we doing any additional physical projects, barriers and stuff in our plan, or is this, we're going to rely on more diagnostic before we start implementing further physical barriers and stuff?
President Manager Miller, to your question, if I'm understanding correctly.
You never heard a bad question.
Yeah.
Everybody gets complimented on their question, no matter how dumb it is.
Yeah, well, it's a great question. In 6 Mile Creek, we have the barriers that we've identified implemented. And so within 6 Mile Creek we're going to continue to remove carp to try in those last few lakes that we think it will make a difference in. We'll continue to do carp removals in Mud and Parley Lake. However, no further implementation of physical structures since we've installed those.
We maintain what we have.
Correct.
Okay, I'll ask a dumb question then.
I thought I had that.
No, I could talk.
There's
this
no,
one.
there's no
No.
limit.
I could
There's
talk.
no limit.
My comments were getting this through all the partners together, but the other thing was, and there, you talked about one was hectares in a shallow lake. And then, so the shallow lakes have it more than you stuck some other lakes that you said didn't have it. Were they deeper, and what is a shallow lake lengthwise, and what's a deep lake, and how does that affect it?
That is a great question.
Unlike mine.
I should just insert that. But measure maximum. Deep lake and a shallow lake are defined by a lake that has greater than 15-foot depth, and that 15-foot depth, if there's anything deeper than 15 feet, that has to be the majority of the area. So pretty much if it's less than 15 feet total max depth, it's a shallow lake. And the idea behind that is that carp can impact a much larger area in the lake versus a deep lake. There's a large area that they're not impacting. They're just impacting the shallow, very small shallow
Yeah.
region. So they just have a much smaller impact. That's the theory.
So are we gonna work on all lakes? Are we gonna work on shallow lakes or deep lakes?
Yeah, so one of the questions that we're trying to answer here is, if there's a lot of carp in a deep lake, is it worth going after? But then a second question related to it is, if a shallow lake's connected to a deep lake, is it still worth going and removing in the deep lake to ensure that more don't go into that shallow lake? And so that's a question the DNR is really, interested in, is the connectedness of, so it's trying to get some of those, and whether or not we can answer all of them, we don't know, but we're certainly going to try.
It's a start, yeah, so, yeah. Once again, compliments on getting all the organizations going.
Thank you.
Working.
Displaying my long-term memory problems question. One of the grants we applied for was that this one, it was a factor that you could say this application statewide. And if that's true, if I remember that correctly, then this is the application maybe. Do I remember correctly or not?
For
Lessard
In the,
stamps.
was that Lessard Stamp? We had, one of the grants we got, we had to say that, we got points for saying it had broader application.
President White, the LCCMAR grant was if you had a local or a statewide application, although I think Lessard Stamps is also the same way. I can let James.
Yeah, you got it right. So I think what you're referring to is in the Legislative Citizens Commission for Minnesota Resources, President White, as we made our application for the 2D model, they were, we had been encouraged by their staff to demonstrate how investment locally in our watershed to develop a tool would have broad statewide application so that other people could learn from it. But that's just a general thing that the state granting agencies are looking for.
Okay, but it was specifically with the other grant. Thank you. Any other questions? Yes.
One legal question. So I know it's not a great question. But when you have an MOU that is generally in kind as far financially, is this follow our standard format, or are the goals amended just to accomplish cooperation and I don't know what else? I'm just curious, the thought behind our typical partnership MOU being a mechanism used for this, and what you were hoping to accomplish with that. And if you did, what did you accomplish?
I can let you.
Madam President, that's an excellent question.
Excellent.
Now, he's never used that before, so it's got to be a good question.
The intention behind an MOU is to be distinguished from an MOA or a cooperative agreement, where you're really looking at binding promises of commitment of resources and expectations and responsibilities that are enforceable.
Okay.
And here, this is a cooperative undertaking where the three agencies are saying, we want to work together, we want to put on paper what our shared understanding of how, who's going to do what in our roles. We're going to acknowledge some sharing of resources in kind and otherwise.
Yeah.
But it's not intended to be a binding contract as an enforceable promise.
Okay. So in a lot of our other partnerships, we're using different legal mechanisms or instruments to.
Right. Many
Okay.
of them begin, I'm sorry, but many begin with an MOU just to say, let's explore this idea together.
Mhm.
And then it can get more specific and more.
Yeah,
concrete.
because it's pretty general, but you're just trying to, staff continuity or just getting beginning expectations written down to formalize those things. Not meant to detail every bit of the next year and what we hope it might be after that. I mean, I hope that both those partnering agencies would take the results and apply it in some way in their own organization, right? We just don't need to be privy to that or a part of that. So, generally speaking, I think this is such fantastic work.
Yeah.
Better than excellent, fantastic. Not only have you been open to learning and analyzing what you've learned and been transparent about that, you've invited other people, you've remained curious about what comes after this and what I'm just very, very impressed, and I will never forget one of the first meetings I ever attended having the U of M present the initial study and the recommendations and thinking, wow, wouldn't it be amazing if you could build those barriers and take their recommendations and do something with it, and here you are 7 years later and you're doing it, and I'm thoroughly impressed. So thank you for all your work.
And this is,
Manager Hajmati?
Based on your conversations with the two other agencies, is there a level of expertise and a level of enthusiasm that matches ours on their part?
President White, Manager Hajmati, I think I can't speak to their enthusiasm, and it wasn't included in the memorandum of understanding of their expectations of enthusiasm, but I think what they are excited about is the DNR is very interested in really getting a sense of how to navigate this situation that we find ourselves in as well, of how to say yes or no and give some scientific credibility to that. And so I think we've seen excitement there from them because it's been really difficult for them.
So they have skin in the game, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So since they have skin in the game, they're likely to really be willing to work. Do they have the expertise? Or do you think that, they're interested in doing it and they're hoping expertise will come from us and from the consultants? Is that?
Yeah, that's really why we want to bring in outside experts. After the management agencies understand the gaps in our scientific knowledge, bringing in somebody that really understands and can provide the value and look at it objectively, and that is really one of the reasons why we, no matter what, wanted to bring somebody in to give credibility to our study and not say, oh, well, we're just either saying it worked really great or didn't work at all and it never would have worked. So finding some objective truth from an external expert, and I think each representative in this partnership knows we're not the carp experts or the ecology experts, but we can bring somebody in that really knows those things to help us navigate it.
And do you think they'd be willing to, we're putting 75,000 into it. If more money was needed, do you think they would be willing to put some in?
Manager Hajmati, I think depending on where it goes, I think we'll see if they'd want to invest more. But I think there's grants out there that I think the researchers probably could pursue before, we could move forward, but it's hard to say whether or
I mean,
not.
the reason I'm asking is because you've done research and you know that you start doing it and then questions come up and uncertainties emerge that we hadn't known before, and then things expand, and in order to answer this question, we've got to answer this first, there's all that stuff, and expenses go up, and there's a lot of stuff that happens as this goes on. So that's why I was asking that question. If they have skin in the game, are they willing to put in money too?
Yeah, it's difficult to say. I don't know that, if the researchers say, oh, we're out of budget and want to continue moving forward, I don't know mid-scope if they would be willing to do it. But I think for now, we think that the 75,000 would be sufficient to answer some number of questions, and I think a decision can be made. How
when
we
the
move
time
forward.
comes?
Yeah.
Okay.
I would think it's,
Andrew Loftus.
I would think it's just valuable to build a relationship that's going to be valuable down the line. I mean, we're starting early enough now with the 3 agencies, and we get this and something else could come up. We're one of the few watershed districts that's working with that part, so it could be really valuable down the line, so.
Absolutely.
Andrew Loftus.
In support of what Mr. Hachmadi mentioned, it might be interesting if the other partner agencies were willing to track their staff hours or in-kind hours. It says something to, we're the lead on this study and we're paying the outlay for the consultant. However, we have X hundred of hours from these 2 agencies in support of it. It makes for a fruitful or exciting introduction or conclusion of all these 3 agencies have worked on this with both money and staff hours and like all public agencies. I think their governing boards or their managers are hesitant to commit staff resources unless it's a priority and unless they think they'll get something out of it, because it's very finite. You only have so many hours and so many things you can get done. So I do think those in-kind hours are valuable, and if they're willing to track them, it might be a neat metric to eventually report on or include with your grant applications. I know sometimes that can be tedious, but it might be a suggestion to them of, hey, we really appreciate this in-kind service you're giving us. Let's track it if they're willing.
Yeah, and Measure Loftus, something that I didn't mention during the presentation is that the Pollution Control Agency, one of the reasons we pulled them into this study as well is they're doing a statewide assessment of in-lake practices, including carp management, to see how effective each management tool is for improving water clarity. And so they're looking at like drawdowns and watershed BMPs and a variety of other things. And carp management is one of those. So they are already contributing funds in their own study. They were a little bit nervous of kind of commingling funds and complicating it. And so I think they do have to track staff time anyways for this. So I think just requesting that is a very reasonable ask for them. I don't think it would be a huge effort. So that's something we can do.
Thank you. Andrew Miller.
The big benefit for them is the fact that they take politics out of the decision and put science in it. And, I remember when I was on the governor's staff and legislators would petition for something just for a ribbon cutting kind of approach rather than, effects. So this really helps them a lot. Not to mention, us too, because this is really good work. I'm really proud to be associated with something that this is basic.
Yes.
That, everybody else approaches just the political thing. Well, go out there and catch some fish and keep everybody happy.
I know that when you and Ms. Sweet brought the results in of your initial assessment, we were very impressed and pleased, and now this is effectuating, taking action based on that, and that's terrific. It's gratifying.
Okay.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Well, I think we should just say, this has been a great presentation.
Yes.
Very exciting.
Great
Excellent.
Made better by the questions.
Mr. Whisker, had you wanted to add something?
It could wait to the administrator's report, but it is just a direct comment on Brian's work, so it's your pleasure. That was
That's
okay.
fine.
Yeah, I mean, I think just piggybacking on everything that the board said, many of you said it better than I could, but to a couple of the direct questions and then just some reflections. This has been run up the flagpole. I've had some eyes on the team that Brian's assembled with Pollution Control Agency and DNR, and they've been very careful to make sure that this represents interests of the whole DNR and the whole Pollution Control Agency. So this has taken some time to run up and come back down. So we know that there's a level of sort of agency investment there, that this isn't just a couple staff that Brian's assembled to work on this. And, you know, I don't want to make the commitment for them, but we've done it before. I think if there's a second phase of work, I would sense that there'd be a willingness to invest. As Brian mentioned, there's some kind of bureaucratic friction. If we went the direction of a cooperative agreement and commingled funds and all those things, it probably would have taken an extra 6 months just to get to agreement. But I do think that there'd be money there if there was next phase of work, and if the board had any concerns about that, I just wanted to speak to it. But zooming back out, I wanted to say that our capital projects get quite a bit of attention for the partnerships that we have to build, and rightfully so. And partnership's a key principle, I think, as the board introduced themselves to new staff. I heard 2 or 3 board members reflect on how important partnership is and the challenges that come along with it, as well as the joys and, of course, the results. And I just wanted to note what the board was noting is Brian has become a real leading example of partnership building in research and monitoring, which is atypical. We could just keep our head down and go out and monitor the resources and produce the results. And frankly, it would be a lot easier. He's done that, I think, really, really well, obviously, with the 2D model, and we've spent years talking about that. But bringing all the communities together for the letters of support for the model, getting support from the LCCMAR and the funding. We took 3 different runs at that. That takes some real grit and staying power to bring people to the table. And this, I think, is just a new and innovative example of him driving partners to the table. The DNR, the PCA, he didn't mention the Minnesota AS Research Center, which is kind of orbiting around the periphery and has some postdocs, and they see interest in this. And I think it stems from some of the things that Manager Loftus was saying. He's just deeply curious, constantly thinking about what are the questions this organization is asking, what you're asking, what questions need solving, but then importantly with our partners, what problems can we solve together? And he's just really lived the value of partnership. I mean, the DNR rejected our permits to do the program. And anybody else could have easily gotten defensive, lobbied for why we should go fishing, run it up the DNR flagpole, turn it into friction, and Brian pivoted that into a partnership to solve the DNR's real issue and study this at a statewide level. And I think that, you know, I just wanted to pile on top of what the board said. It's, we'll see how the results shake out, but just even getting to this point and that whole approach and attitude so aligned with the district's work, I think he deserves a good amount of kudos, so.
Kudos.
Bravo.
Item 13 is board inquiries, issues, and ideas. Are there any input for this evening? Then we'll move to your report, Mr. Whisker.
Yep, thanks, President White, managers. Hopefully you have good, excellent, fantastic, great questions. Water levels, so we've received a little bit more rain. We're just over 27 inches of precip this year, so we're chipping away at the deficit. We're just short of, we're just below 2 inches of normal for the year. Because of that, drought conditions have improved. We're now considered abnormally dry, down from extreme or severe. That is the lowest drought classification, so if we got a little bit more, we wouldn't have a drought this year. That covers about 46% of the state. Go ahead, Manager Hedgemeier. I think I saw your hand go up.
When they do the drought monitoring,
Yes.
do they do only surface water, or do they look at groundwater too?
I think my speculation is it's surface water only, but I'd have to look into that unless, Chris, you know the answer off the top
I
of your
heard a
head.
meteorologist on the radio on the way here who said surface. He
Okay.
said they don't do groundwater.
okay? Because, you know,
Right,
I've learned from,
that's right.
I've
There's-
learned on the 2D model that groundwater is just as important.
The-
And when,
Can I ask a question about that? I
Sure.
never thought about that before, but, you know, the lakes aren't dry, so is it still supplying, well, I suppose the wetlands are, but the lakes aren't dry, is it still supplying the groundwater?
well, I'm going to back up a minute. The drought designation's really a reflection of how much fell from the sky, not water levels or groundwater levels. That's why I led with, you know, there's almost 28 inches this year. How that reflects on normal is how they develop their rating of depth of drought. And your question was related, Manager Miller, to if,
The groundwater, because we haven't got, we're still getting,
yeah,
water's leaking into the, whatever, permeating the ground
Yeah.
aquifer. And is it affected noticeably by the lack of rain?
it is. That's as you're both, you know, you're paired up with Brian on the 2D model front, and a big component of the two-dimensional model is understanding the superficial aquifer or groundwater that's near the surface. And what we've talked about is when you have periods of drought, there's actually an open reservoir there. So when it rains, that is recharging, you know, local groundwaters. We're seeing wetland levels rise as a result, which are usually a local expression of groundwater. And on the flip side, when we've had extended years of rain, that subsurface storage is gone. So when you get another inch on top of a completely saturated system, you can have flooding even though you don't have 6 inches of rain. You might only have an inch a week, and it's exacerbating flooding. So yeah, certainly the rainfalls impacted the amount of storage that's available in the system at the surface and the lake levels, but also the superficial aquifer too.
Thank you.
Go ahead,
Mr.
Chris.
Mann.
To build on James's comments, it's just there's a time step difference. The surface water responds a lot quicker, whereas the groundwater just takes a lot longer. That's why we saw those multiple years of rain, it built up essentially the storage that was there. Now, we're slowly depleting it, but as we start to pick up that precipitation, it will slowly start to recharge. It just doesn't go as fast as, say, you see the lake levels respond to that as well. So there's a little, just the time step.
A quick question for Chris. How do we account for snow when, in that 27 inches he's talking about?
Manager Olson, it's accounted for, they do snow water equivalents.
Okay.
And so that 27 inches, they account for how much actual precipitation depth is in there, and that goes into the number that James is presenting.
And they do calendar year and by growing season too, in terms of the,
So it's January 1 to January 1?
yeah.
Okay. Okay, thanks.
So lake levels have responded. We're hovering right around 928.6 at Lake Minnetonka, which is the desired elevation for ISIN. And you remember over the year, we've been talking 12, 15 inches below runout elevation. So we've seen the watershed respond. Obviously, the dam's been closed since July, and we're at the end of the year, so it's going to remain closed. Tiffany's been in contact with City of Minnetonka, who helps us winterize the dam and put the stop logs in, and that's going to happen Tuesday, November 14th. So we'll issue some communication out to the public. Doesn't look like a really rainy 7-day forecast, and downstream of Lake Minnetonka at Hiawatha Avenue, we're just under 20 cubic feet per second, so there's a little bit of flow in the creek. Great questions. We had some commissioner meetings. President White touched on those great meetings with Commissioner Anderson. We'll circle back with him in the spring and set up a tour that might coincide with a tour that Mayor Whalen from the city of Minnetrista's expressed some interest in getting out to that site. Also, and I'll send an email out on this because I don't have the date in front of me, the mayor reached out to myself and President White and wanted to extend an invitation to Minnetrista's first community holiday event. It sounds like Commissioner Anderson will be there. I think you're otherwise engaged. I'll try and make it. I think
It's when we're up north.
I think it's the third week in November.
It's the 30th.
The 30th, okay. Better memory than me. I think both commissioners, we've met with Lundy too, very complimentary of our work, appreciate the transparency and the points of connection. No real significant questions or concerns. I think one of the things that I heard is Commissioner Anderson noted that he understands that relationships with cities are really strong because he's been making the rounds and hearing positive third-party validation. They both seem to really understand the briefing and the status around 325 Blake Road and feel pretty comfortable with the district's approach and provided some general advice, among which included continue to exercise patience and think strategically about the long-term vision. And we'll continue the commissioner meetings. I think we have one on, is it Monday or Tuesday? With Manager Hedgemati and President White with Commissioner Conley. So we'll keep reporting back on how those are going.
I forgot to mention too that we got to meet, new to us, the two new aides for
Yeah, that's right.
Commissioner Lundy, and one of them lives in Hopkins, so they'll get here out in the boardwalk too.
Yeah, she wanted a tour as well. So we'll be busy networking with people out in the field, I guess, in the spring. Mike Heyman and I had a really interesting meeting recently with Lennar Corporation that Manager Olson had helped set up and was also at the request of city leadership. Unfortunately, he couldn't be there, feeling a little bit under the weather, but Lennar's expressed some interest in the western growth area of Victoria. So as the city starts to think about annexing west and they're finished growing south into the area of Turbid Lunston or Pearson Lake, and wanted to get together to dig into our understanding of the city's 2040 plan for the western chain of lakes. As you remember, we partnered with the City of Victoria in helping draft sections of their growth plan, which calls for a series of interconnected greenways with different public nodes on each of the lakes that would integrate some of our restoration work. So we had a good first introductory meeting and discussion around opportunity for potential partnership with them and the Watershed. Obviously, Lennar's thinking about acquisition for development. They're very interested in understanding transportation and utility constraints from a city perspective as they grow and sewer and deliver roads out there. It's wetland rich. You know, where are the problems going to be and how does the city see looping water and sewer? They want to know what the regulatory constraints are, and also it's obviously an interest to them to know where we have interest in investing in the natural systems for wetland restorations and those sorts of things.
Yep.
So I think we'd mapped out as a next step getting together and having a group work session with both Lennar and the City of Victoria and engaging the city engineer, planning staff, and city manager who had encouraged them to come talk to us. So
Excellent.
You've had phenomenal success with Lennar, which is one of the biggest single-family builders in the country. Is there other developers out there that you should be
Yep. There are, yeah.
working with?
I think going indirect route to the wonderful question, all of our work in Victoria started with a memorandum of understanding. Nothing binding, just partnership, building off of what historically had been sort of a fractious relationship. And we were aligned around coordinating permitting. They wanted us focused in the Wasserman Lake corridor. So not a lot of specifics, but trying to integrate their land use planning with their desire to see clean water in Wasserman Lake and bringing our regulatory tools and capital investment to the table. And here we are several cooperative agreements later and a comp plan later. And the city is actively driving developers to come talk to us and saying, you really can't go west and do work out here unless the watershed's at the table. So it's just a completely different relational landscape. And so we know from the City of Victoria, they've called it, there's several other tire kickers, which they think is interesting as they look west. And you think about the development markets, that there's still active interest in acquisition and pressure moving west, even in this development climate. So they are doing the same thing with those developers, is encouraging, conversations between all of us. So we do have a great relationship with Lennar, but we know that there's multiple folks that are thinking about investing in the growth of the City of Victoria. So
Thank you.
any other questions on that? Otherwise, we'll just see how things continue to shake out and report back. I thank Manager Olson for helping make the connection. And then I will wrap up by just saying this last week or last 2 weeks was just a really enjoyable one for district staff. We have a team that plans periodically a spirit week for the team. So there's some fantasy-based fancy dress because people are into Lord of the Rings and Star Wars and those sorts of things. So in addition to expressing their inner water resource nerddom, they're able to bring sort of that personal connection to the office. So there's just a ton of laughter. It's been a lot of fun seeing people make new connections as we've had new team members join. I'm sure they're thinking, what did I get into? And then just, old team members continuing to strengthen their connections. And for me, it just gave me a minute of retrospection, thinking about how far we've come with the staff team. We're still, as Tessa's pointed out and asked me a couple times, why do we have so many vacancies in the org chart, and what's the plan for filling those? But how far we've come with the staff team. And part of that retrospection was we got to celebrate Becky Christopher's 15th year with Minnehaha Creek Watershed District.
But you started 8th grade?
Staff made that same comment. I think she's definitely aged more gracefully than I have. She only started a year behind me, and I haven't been ever accused of starting in the 8th grade. So, yeah, but we were just reflecting on all the work that she's done for us over the years, and I think a lot of that work helped set the stage for where we are today. So we had a lot of fun recognizing Becky as a team, and I wanted to bring some of that here tonight. I think for me, it just served as a real reminder of the power of people. We talked a lot through the introduction to the board, our consultant team, the staff team, and how good it feels and how much we can accomplish when we're all rowing in the right direction and supporting each other. So the benefits of just investing in each other, board and staff staff to staff, and also just building the lasting relationships, because that's helped grow people and expand their positive impact on the organization and how strong it feels, but also the impact that we're having out in the watershed. So I just wanted to reflect on the example Becky set and invite the board to join me in thanking her for her contributions. And I thought I'd take a minute to recap a few of those highlights. There's a lot because it's 15 years. But her journey started in 8th grade, a year after me. And we worked together in the permitting program, navigating a whole variety of permits and learning all the ins and outs of, the policies and the rules and our land use partners out in the communities. It was just a great learning experience of our cities and what we're trying to accomplish. And we had the great fortune of working with Lewis Smith on that multi-year odyssey to rewrite our water resource regulations and communicate to cities that we're going to regulate the volume that you produce, and we're going to increase how the width of wetland buffers, which drew a focused amount of interest and engagement from cities and members of the development community. So after that process, it took a little bit of convincing to have Becky leave permitting and join me in planning. I think she was scarred. But after some cajoling and reassurance, we got to work in planning, and Becky really helped lead the way, building an amazing team. Mike always reminds me, and he reminded me a lot this week, that one of Becky's biggest single accomplishments of the organization was hiring him. And that has gone quite well. But in planning early on, she right away championed a directional shift in how our capital improvement program was structured. That's really carried through our what was responsive model, now LWP, and our focal geographies. First convincing the Board of Water and Soil Resources to support an amendment to our watershed plan that allowed for general investment strategies in the creek corridor versus very time-bound, discrete, specific projects. And that gave us a ton of flexibility that we really needed at that time to stitch the greenway together without some of the hamstringing that the prior CIP had had. And like I mentioned, it led us into this whole concept of focal geographies and deep partnership that she rolled out in the 2017 plan, and now even today, the tail end of that, the land and water partnership. She's worked on a whole bunch of different projects before she joined and built out policy planning, including in Long Lake, which she's now carried forward even further over the last year, where she secured about $250,000 from the Metropolitan Council of Environmental Services to remediate and retrofit a former secondary wastewater treatment system just south of Long Lake that we now affectionately call on staff the Hodek Memorial Sewage Lagoon, as an homage to her maiden name. Downstream, you advanced the West 54th Fish Ladder, which turned into Arden Park. It was just supposed to be a fish bypass, and if it wasn't for her work with the landowners downstream on Reach 14, the city and all the early feasibility work, we wouldn't have ever really moved Arden Park forward, and that got graciously handed off to the project planning team. On a cultural front, I think she's really leaned in and built the culture that we know and love today. She helped form a staff collaboration group, which ultimately drafted the foundational building blocks and our core values today. I think she was instrumental in helping the board and me and President White and others lead through significant times of change in 2014 to 2016. And around that time, it reintroduced the organization to 29 member communities that had had previously a different experience of the organization. So really helped lead an organizational rebrand through our 2017 plan, rolling out balanced urban ecology, convincing cities that we should aggregate our time and intellectual capital and capital in concentrated geographies because we'd provide sustained and deeper and more meaningful partnerships. And there was a lot that came with communicating that idea and getting it codified in policy with universal support from our cities. And that's become an inspiration, I think, for surrounding Watershed. She's immediately after the 2017 plan, I think Bassett's Creek, 9 Mile Riley were like, come present how you did that, what's balanced urban ecology about. So it really set a tone and a bar and carved out a position for the district of leadership in the region. And then, pivoting off of that and through the organizational restructure, she stepped into an even more, to an area of ambiguity and even more prominent role and organizational leader as our director of policy. And gone outside of her role, oftentimes helping me develop our annual budgeting process, working on our classification and compensation systems, so dabbling in human resources. And then since then, just in the last 2 or 3 years, just 3 or 4 keystone initiatives have been advanced, whether it's the Long Lake Creek Roadmap, kind of focal geography light. We now have 3 projects, 1 in each city, being advanced with capital dollars from the state. The complement to our focal geographies, the Land and Water Partnership, our Climate Action Framework, and then tonight, the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion framework that she's worked on with Kate. So it's just an amazing body of work when you step back and think about what one person can do in 15 years. It's pretty impressive and a lot of fun to think about. And overall that time, she's just shown this unwavering forward drive, endless optimism, this mind for policy. I don't know how she can think about process that spans 2 years, 3 years. I'm usually focused on what day it is and what we're doing tomorrow. She's always cracking me up with a wry sense of humor, and I think importantly for the organization and the people around her, she just brings this ever-present, calming presence, strategic mindset. She's shown an ability to grow other people and never-ending patience for my ideas and love of many words. And she's just proven herself as an organizational leader and all-around amazing person. And she taught me a lot. I think she's taught the rest of the staff team a lot, and I think the board a lot too, and has helped us all grow into the organization that we were sort of celebrating through our introduction to new staff members. So I just wanted to thank her. We did it as a staff team, but I wanted to do it with the board as well because it's been a fun ride, and congratulate her on 15 years and say cheers to the next 15.
You mentioned rowing together. There was several people that took the oars out of people's hands that were being used against one another and made sure they were all rowing had the oars in the water rowing together. And I think if that isn't too crude, I think you were such a critical part of putting the Watershed District staff back in line with the mission and the vision that we eventually developed. And I want to compliment James for bringing that up tonight. It's a wonderful testimony that your boss, I never heard any boss say anything like that about me, but That's really something, and doing it in a public forum, so I really think you really deserve it.
Thank you, Mr. Miller.
Absolutely. Very generous, James, and yeah, so the staff, in addition to feeling old, I just feel really fortunate to work at a place that I enjoy enough to want to stay 15 years and 15 more potentially, so.
Potentially.
I don't retire before then. But yeah, the board is a big part of that certainly, and I just, really am grateful to James and the board for all the opportunities I've been given in my time here and being able to grow my career. It's very rewarding and a lot of fun, so.
Well, we're grateful for you, so thank you.
Yes.
Wonderful.
Oh, no, I have a question. Do you have any pictures of the Free Spirits?
We have a lot of pictures.
Well,
None
would
of
you
them are-
forward them, or we can?
If you'd like, I've got a great picture of keyboard with Elvis shoes on.
Yeah, something that you can relate to people that say, oh, I recognize you.
Thank you very much. The meeting is adjourned.